Hello everyone, this is Locked Ones, or Localized Ones, the show about film translation in all its permutations, including subtitling, closed captioning, dubbing, audio description, and so on. I am your host, Max Diragin, a professional subtitler and chair of the International Association of Subtitlers, Subtle, and my co-host Bill couldn't make it today due to personal reasons, but I'm joined by a very special guest, legendary Randy Thom. Randy, thank you for joining today.
I'm happy to be here.
In the world of sound design, film sound design, Randy is a household name. He has been nominated for and awarded many accolades, and has worked, according to your IMDb page, more than 75 films, maybe even closer to 200 now. And maybe on this introduction, could you tell our viewers who might not know you about yourself, your professional journey from the Berkeley days at the radio station and up to where you are today?
Sure, yeah. I dropped out of college in 1970 and started roaming around the country, the U.S., being a hippie, and wound up volunteering in a radio station, a non-commercial radio station in Ohio at a college. And I had never thought about doing sound work before that, but I thought it would be fun to do things in a radio station. And so they graciously let me get involved there. And I was pretty good at science in school, and so I fairly easily understood how all of the equipment worked, and started working on live music shows and producing little pieces for National Public Radio, and little sound design jobs, though I didn't call it sound design at the time, for radio plays that were being produced. And so I did that at that station, and then moved to Berkeley to work at a similar radio station in Berkeley, California. And so by the mid 70s, I was getting a little tired of doing the radio work, and decided I wanted to work in film sound, and knocked on lots of doors that got politely closed in my face, and finally made a very lucky phone call to a guy named Walter Murch, who had gone to the University of Southern California with George Lucas, and had moved up to the Bay Area with Lucas and Coppola when they started this company called American Zoetrope, and famously produced The Godfather and lots of other great films. And so anyway, I went for an interview with Walter, really spent a whole day kind of following him around and talking with him and having lunch with him. And at the end of the day, he asked me to write an essay about what I'd experienced that day, and I did. And he liked it, and hired me to work on the very first film I ever worked on, which was Apocalypse Now, which turned out to be the best film school I could ever have dreamed of being involved in. And as soon as that was over, I was asked to work on the second Star Wars film, The Empire Strikes Back. And so that was the beginning of my involvement with Lucasfilm. And I've been with Lucasfilm now for over 45 years. And I've been the director of sound design at Skywalker Sound since 2004, I think.
And I took a look at the website of Skywalker Sound, and it's a very stacked place. It's a powerhouse, I would say. You have Ben Burtt, if I remember correctly. You have Gary Wright-Strom, you yourself, and quite a few other people who together helped popularize this idea that sound in film is much more than just, the score and hard effects. No, it's a storyteller. It can do so much in so many ways, which I think is a fascinating discovery for anyone. But for us subtitlers, it's particularly important because we sometimes, I'm sure you watched captioned films where they have sound descriptions in brackets or parentheses, like phone ringing, dog barking, that kind of thing. And I'm
Yeah.
interested, has it ever come to your mind that there is a connection there between what you do professionally, create sound, and what subtitlers do in text, describe it in parentheses?
It has. I've thought about it quite a bit, and I think it's such a challenge to do that job well, um, because mentioning a sound is not the same thing as experiencing the sound, obviously. And so I have to admit that sometimes I'm irritated by seeing descriptions of sounds in subtitles. But I understand that at the very least, the function that it performs is as a show of respect to people who do have hearing deficiencies of one kind or another. Um, it's a way of saying, we understand that you want to be involved in the story, and it's important for you to know what's going on, that you might not be aware of what's going on because of a hearing problem that you may have. So I certainly understand that it's an important thing to do, and I would love at some point to be a part of trying to figure out how to do it even better.
Oh, we will get to that. I have a few questions about that,
Yeah, yeah,
something that I'm particularly interested. But I want to
yeah,
say that um, it really, you can convey much of this sound design if you're just good enough and if you are creative enough as a captioner and just use the right words. I think it's not dissimilar to you and me listening to an audiobook, right? You let's say about a period drama or something from a different era, ancient Egypt. You
yeah.
listen, you imagine how people looked, what they did, what the setting was. For deaf people, it's like that, but instead of seeing it in your mind, it's listening and trying to figure things out. But for example, let's think about How to Train Your Dragon. I think that film and all the films in this series have an excellent sound design. And one thing about it is that every dragon type has a particular sound signature, and you can tell something about their personality from the sounds that they make. For example, Red Death, like it's a big, menacing, this final boss kind of dragon.
Beard of Thor! What is that? Odin, help us. Catapults!
And you could write something like roar for a sound, or you could write earth rattling roar. It's a different thing in your mind, right? Or hook fang. The monster's nightmare. It's like hot-headed and kind of fiery. It could be aggressive, crackling snarls. That
Mhm.
kind of thing. So you play with the words and you
Sure.
put this thing inside. Or Star Wars. Star Wars is it's so much characterization in sound. And you in your blog this year you had a blog because I read all your whole blog from start to where it is today, every single thing, and you wrote about character development through sound. So sound changes throughout the film or series, and of course, to convey the change in the character, subtitles should of course do that as well. I wanted to ask you about maybe your favorite examples from your work and also general philosophy, how you approach changing the design of sound or kind of altering it to convey that change.
Sure, yeah. Well, one that comes to mind immediately is the signal that the Jodie Foster character hears in the film Contact.
Hmm.
she's an astronomer and she's trying to find out if there is intelligent life somewhere other than Earth. And so, sometimes scientists will turn uh, visual data into sonic, they'll sonify visual data. And one of the reasons is that sometimes if you do that, it will help you recognize patterns in the data that you wouldn't recognize immediately just by looking at it. And so early in the film, you see her out in the desert with these big radio telescopes behind her, and she has headphones on.
Uh-huh.
And so she's listening to a sonified version of these signals that are coming in. And at first it's just noise, and then it turns into a simple pattern and then a more complex pattern that suggests that it might actually have information in it. And you hear that sound a couple more times in the film, and each time you get more detail out of it, and it tracks her kind of understanding of what's going on with these signals.
Yeah, that's an interesting example. I wonder how I would approach subtitling that. I would spend some time. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's quite challenging. You have to do character development, convey emotion, world building. Maybe there's a sonic metaphor or motif, and you have to make sure that it connects in the subtitle. It's a lot. And I'm sure in sound design there are a lot of challenges too, both creative and technical. And this is another thing that I would like to ask you. What are some of the most challenging sounds, types of sounds or particular sounds that you have worked on?
There have been many.
Mm.
Creature vocalizations are, I think, the most difficult kind of sound design to do, because especially if you're working with a creature that does change over time and displays a variety of emotions. In the How to Train Your Dragon series, for instance, Toothless, who's the main dragon, sometimes has to sound vicious and ferocious, frightening, sometimes sad, sometimes injured, sometimes funny. And so it's really a challenge to come up with sounds that will hit each of those emotional notes, which are very different from each other. And the way that we do it is mostly through finding or making recordings of actual real world animals. Toothless uses lots of elephant vocalizations, horse vocalizations, dog vocalizations, for instance. And one of the tricks, because you never find just one species, an elephant, for instance, that you're going to get all of those emotional notes from. And so you always have to resort to making it a combination of several different kinds of animals. And then the challenge is making those transitions seamless as possible, so it doesn't sound like Toothless is sounding like an elephant in one moment, and a horse in another moment, and a dog in another moment. And so there are various tricks that we employ to make those transitions believable, and so they don't jump out at you.
It's also difficult to capture this in subtitles, both the transitions and generally when it comes to a creature that doesn't exist, you have to use the words that ground these sounds in something that does exist, because you can't just write alien sounds. What is a deaf person supposed to imagine? So you will write something like maybe wet guttural gargling, something like something that kind of you can understand. And but it's difficult, and also there are sometimes many sounds, and you have to think, okay, you can't add all of them, it's too much. So which
Yeah.
ones are more important? And I will keep them, and which ones are less important. I remember you worked on Crimson Peak, I think, and
Yeah.
I watched it just recently. There's a YouTube video. I don't remember who it was, unfortunately, the YouTuber. They took apart the first 2 minutes of the film and recorded every single sound, just wrote down it. And it's more than 50. And I was like, wow, that is a lot of work. That is a lot of thinking about which ones are more important. Good
Yeah.
luck.
Yeah.
um,
Well, the one of the most important things that we do in sound is to decide what to focus on in each moment. Yeah, it's very common to have um, 10, 20, 50 sounds potentially competing for attention at the same time in a scene, in a complex scene, especially. And so, what we always try to do is decide what should be focused on in any given moment,
mm,
and then transition to the next sound that it makes sense to focus on, and keep the others lower in volume or get rid of them completely. And it's amazing actually how accepting audiences are to
mm.
that kind of very discriminatory decision making in terms of not presenting everything that could possibly be heard, but only what seems to be important at the moment.
Yeah. And speaking of challenges, I actually am a bit. Just recently, I watched for the first time the film Once Upon a Time in the West. And it was a puzzle for me to figure out what to do with the opening scene because the sound in it is very special. Do you recall what is special about it?
I do. I know quite a lot about that scene because I've done research on it. Um, the film was directed by Sergio Leone. And one of the unusual things that Leone used to do was to have his composer, Ennio Morricone, write and record all of the music for the film before the film was shot. And Leone liked to do that in part because he liked to be able to play the score on the set to inspire the actors. And so they did that for Once Upon a Time in the West, but neither Leone nor Morricone liked the first cue, the first piece of music that plays there in the beginning of the film, the main title sequence. And they really didn't know what they were going to do because the time to begin shooting was coming up quickly, and Leone really wanted some music to play back on the set. And Morricone happened to go to a musique concrète concert where a guy was playing a ladder, banging on the ladder and scraping the ladder. Very avant-garde music at the time. And a little light bulb turned on in his head, and he rushed out and called Sergio Leone and said there should be no conventional music in the beginning of the film at all. It should all be the sounds that happen in this place, which is a little railway station in the middle of the American desert, presumably, even though it was shot in Spain, and where three bad guys are waiting to kill someone who's going to arrive on the train. And Leone liked that idea a lot. And then he went about rewriting the script for that opening sequence so that it would feature a different sound or set of sounds in each of these shots, where you see each of these three guys in different places around this railway station experiencing different sounds. There's an overall continuous sound made by the water tower, a squeaking sound as the blades go around and around in the wind. And that helps establish the geography of the place, because if you're hearing that close, you know you're in a certain place in that location. If it's far away, you know you get a sense of where you are. but then there are also water dripping sounds. There's the crackling of knuckles because one guy is, cracking his knuckles. There's a kind of primitive telegraph machine that's behind another guy that irritates him, and so he rips the wires out and stops it. A fly buzzing around inside the barrel of a gun. And so it was clear I'd been obsessed with that scene because I'm always interested in helping screenwriters and directors figure out how to incorporate sound into their films in a meaningful way, so that it's not just a kind of decoration that you add to the end, at the end, but instead it informs the characters and helps you learn about who the characters are. And so it seemed to me, as soon as I saw that scene, that it was one of the best examples in film history of a director doing exactly that, really writing sound into the script in a meaningful way. So I went on a search for the original script to see what that looked like. And I still haven't found the original script in Italian, but I found a translation at the Academy, the Motion Picture Academy in Los Angeles, and it does what I thought it would do, which was to really seriously incorporate sound into the script.
So here's a mini puzzle for you. If you had to subtitle this and preserve this idea of this the score made in a music concrete way, how would you do that?
Wow, that would be a big challenge. I think I would just try to describe as you have, use the most descriptive words possible to give a sense of what each of these sounds are. I'm not sure what I could do beyond that.
I had an idea to maybe use musical words, like I have here examples. Telegraph clacks a stuttering rhythm. Water dripping in steady beat. Windmill groans in slow cadence. Knuckles pop percussively. And so
Yeah,
these musical words maybe together could give an idea.
I think so. I think you're
Have to
right.
do something. It's, there's challenging things. And continuing on the topic of challenges, there's another thing that we found out about you that was like, oh, really? And it is that you have worked on video games. A few of them, both
Just a
back in the
couple.
day
Yeah.
and recently. And I just wanted to know if there is, because, back in the day, today you can add any music to games, but back in the day it was technically limited. You had the compression and everything. So is there any difference between creating sound for games and for film, technically or creatively?
I haven't. You may be looking at my IMDb page, which often has misinformation on it, because people, almost anybody can edit anybody else's IMDb
Right.
page. And so I'm constantly being listed as working on projects that I'm not really working on. I have no idea why people do this, but I think they just want to be mischievous. But I have not worked on any video games recently. I did do the sound for Alejandro Iñárritu's virtual reality piece called Carne Irena, but that was almost 10 years ago. But previous to that, the only video game that I'm remembering working on at the moment was Scarface. Yeah. And I remember being very frustrated on that one by the technology, by the limited bandwidth that we had available to us, how few sounds we could get into the system. And there were similar challenges on the Iñárritu virtual reality piece also, in that they were rewriting the software for the piece as we were doing it. And we were just constantly having technical problems, and we'd feed a sound into the game engine, basically. And it would sound completely different when it got played back. And so we were constantly having to tweak the input sound so that it would come out close to the way we wanted it to sound. And we were really frustrated by it, and Iñárritu was frustrated by it. So I'm hoping that the state of the art of video game, sound production is a little better now than it was then. I assume it is.
Yeah, it's. Oh, go ahead.
But generally, I think it's safe to say even now you have fewer options with video game sound. For instance, the Foley for video game sounds tends to be done in a very kind of simplistic way. If you're dealing with footsteps, you basically have 6 or 8 or 10 pre-recorded footsteps that you just play over and over again, and try to make sound different with EQ changes and things like that. But you don't have the luxury of being able to feed a full, normal Foley performance from a Foley artist into a scene. And you may know better than I that maybe that's not the case now, but it was the case the last time I checked in.
We are also frustrated with subtitles in games, especially for sound. Sometimes they don't exist. Sometimes they're very simple and just like what you said, basically kind of pre-prepared, all the same, just placeholder things.
Right.
And we don't know how to affect that.
Yeah.
And maybe switching gears a little bit, also, I wanted to ask you another thing. You, in your career, in your writing, in your interviews, have spoken a lot about the importance of including sound people, the sound teams early in the filmmaking process, rather than at the end of it, hoping that it will just help. Somehow they will figure it out. And no, if you do that, if you add people earlier, if you have a conversation with them, then that not only improves the sound, but also the film overall. And we subtitlers, we feel even further down the line, no one listens to us and we feel like people think, hey, they'll figure it out. But if we could talk to the director, the sound team, the sound designer, the supervising sound editor, and they could tell us, well, what their ideas for the film are, that would make our life easier and the film more enjoyable. So I want to break that vicious cycle with you and do a thought experiment. So imagine
Okay.
you're working on Castaway, and Robert Zemeckis comes up to you and says, Randy, there's this guy, subtitler Max Diragan. He's going to work on our film. Could you tell him what's up with sound in our film? What would be your instructions to me, your guidance for what to look out for?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there would be a lot of things. I think of the sequence on the island, for instance, where the Tom Hanks character is isolated for several years alone on this island. And there's almost no dialogue in this sequence and no music at all, which is, I think, at least 45 minutes long. And this, I think we would have been able to anticipate, even before the film was shot, that not very much usable sound could be recorded on the set because they were always shooting next to surf, to waves crashing. And, there are different kinds of waves, many different kinds. And the kind of cinematic wave that we think of is one wave breaking, crashing on a beach, and then relative silence, and then another wave. But most of the time, when you're next to an ocean, on a beach, there are waves crashing all around you all the time, partly because the waves rarely hit at 90 degrees. They're hitting the shoreline at an oblique angle, so there's crashing happening all the time, somewhere along the beach. And so, which is just noise. It's like pink noise. And it gets very boring very fast, and it doesn't really have any character. So going into that film, we knew that Bob Zemeckis was going to want the ocean to have a character. and to have moods, and sometimes to sound distant and sometimes to sound kind of lonely. And so we knew that we were going to have to craft the waves very specifically. And so every wave that you hear in that 45 minutes or so is individually designed. And so it's thousands of waves. And waves are actually a lot more difficult to edit than I ever imagined they were before I started working on that film, especially when you're seeing the wave, because tend to be very complex. One part of the wave will be just clear water. Another part of the wave will be fizzy, lots of bubbles. Another part of the wave will be swirling, and so it's a real challenge to pull together a set of sounds that'll be completely believable if you're looking at that wave and deciding whether you're believing that what you're hearing is real. So I think one of the things that I would have talked to you about is to try to find a way to describe these various moods of waves. And sometimes it's like the waves are angry. They're trying to kill the Hanks character. Other times they, lull him to sleep. And so it would be important to get those kinds of feelings into the subtitles.
I also read somewhere that the wind in Castaway was like geographical and different for different locations. Would that be something?
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, yeah, we recorded most of the winds actually out in the desert, a long way away from the ocean, because we didn't want, ocean sounds to pollute the wind sounds, because we wanted individual control over each set of sounds. So we went to these deserts that had palm trees, because he's surrounded by palm trees on the island there. And so we recorded wind blowing through the palm trees. And we also just manipulated palm fronds, so that we could simulate them, rustling in a gust of wind, for instance.
Yeah, and for wind you can have all kinds of words. You can bluster, it can howl, it can whisper, it can do so many things. You can be pretty creative here as a subtitler. What if the same happened with Alejandro Iñárritu with the Revenant? Would you tell me anything about cacayanga?
Yeah, sure.
Eh?
Cacayanga is a word that Iñárritu invented. And I think for him, it means a kind of useful dirtiness, a useful noise, or even distortion. We sound people like to pride ourselves on putting together pristine sounding recordings that have almost no noise, that are just pure sound. And Iñárritu, in terms of sound effects, really tends to not like that kind of sound.
Mm.
He wants sound to be complicated and dirty and gritty, and he thinks that it's much more interesting that way. And he thinks that these pristinely recorded sounds seem artificial.
Mm.
So when I began working on that film, I needed to kind of rearrange my brain in a way to think about the sound in the way that he was thinking about it and not be afraid of using sounds with some distortion in them, with kind of dirty, gritty feel that I would normally stay away from. And it was very important to him, for instance, that the earth, the ground that the bear and the Leonardo DiCaprio character were on when the bear attack happens be as believable as possible. And we tried various kinds of, conventional Foley techniques to do the, footsteps and rolling around and movement on the ground. And none of them seemed to, convey what we needed, partly because Iñárritu really wanted it to sound wet.
Mm.
And there's an interesting phenomenon that happens with sound in terms of wetness. And that is if you have a scene that's, let's say, has wet grass in it that people are walking on, and you bring real grass into a Foley stage and you make all the blades of grass wet, they really don't sound very different from the way they would sound if they were dry and you walked on them. Certainly not different in a way that makes you immediately realize, oh, that's wet grass. That's the sound of wet grass. And so it was working on that film that I finally had this epiphany about wet sounds, which is that the thing that makes a sound seem wet to us is actually bubbles. It's air gaps collapsing. So I think the only time you really hear water, what you're hearing is air bubbles. Whether it's swirling water that has bubbles inside of it, or waves breaking, or footsteps, for instance, and the way that we finally solved the puzzle of how to make the ground seem wet was to have the ground so saturated with water that that when you stepped on it, it would push air through it, causing little bubbles, and that's what really made it sound wet. And when we finally arrived at that, Iñárritu was finally happy with it.
So as a subtitler, I would need to go, I guess, for realness, for the dirtiness. I remember you described the sound of the bear's glottal in your, I think, blog. That is a word we would definitely use to kind of convey that. It's very interesting. And the last film that I wanted to ask you about, what you would tell me as an instruction, is a film that never came out. But you wrote about it, a series of articles. I found them very illuminating. It's Playback. It's a film that exists only in the screenplay. So you described what you would do if you could work on it. But what would be your instruction to me if that thing was real?
Well, I think it would be to follow the themes that I described, and one of them was a water theme.
Right.
The film is about a young, or I should say, the script, because as you say, it never actually got made into a film. It was written by a guy named Raymond Chandler, who's famous for writing detective stories. and several films were made from his novels. But this one, the script never got turned into a film. But it's about a young woman who was accused of murdering her husband, actually, somewhere on the east coast of the U.S., and was tried for it, and released. But there was always this rumor that she actually did the murder, but somehow she didn't get convicted for it. And so she went away and went to the west coast of North America. And so when the script begins, we find her on a train arriving a place somewhere near Seattle, Washington. And what happens later is that she becomes involved in a similar incident where she's once again accused of murdering somebody. And so my Chandler was a great writer of dialogue, but he really didn't have much of a concept of how to use sound in a film. And so I thought it could be a useful exercise to take this script written by somebody who's now dead and won't be offended, and rewrite it in a way that would use sound creatively. And in order to do that, I really focused on this woman's point of view, and so tried to play the scenes as much as possible through her point of view, which allowed us to be subjective about it and not play everything absolutely realistically and objectively. And one of the ways that I did that was to reinforce this water theme that was already in the story from Chandler, and but make it much more her experience. And so, beginning with that train sequence, she's looking out the window of the train and she sees, as the train goes over a bridge, she sees an ocean cove below and water splashing around, and a bird flies up with a fish that it's caught, and the water and blood from the fish splashes onto the window that she's looking out of. And I think that kind of moment would be a great time to use the kind of descriptors you're talking about.
So waters in all their different ways, just this theme of water. Also, maybe the theme of repetition is one thing that you talked about. There is like, you can use different words for repetition, like repeated or twin thing. That could work. Very interesting to hear that. The next question is, I think, difficult, but that's why I'm asking you.
Okay.
I probably would be stumped by it. So in his book, which I have, by the way, right here, In the Blink of an Eye by Walter
Right.
March, among other things, he talks about his rule of 6, the 6 criteria for making a successful edit, starting from the most important one, which I think is conveying the right emotion, and the second one is moving the story forward, and then it is ensuring the good visual rhythm, and so on. What would be your rule of 6 for creating a successful sound?
Well, I might have to think about that and and write back to you, or have another little podcast recording where we talk about it, because it's not something that I'm not going to be able to come up with 6 rules off the top of my head, but they would obviously be similar. I always say that emotion is the most important thing in a sound. It's not historical realism or authenticity. It's capturing the right emotion for a sound. So, for instance, when I'm designing a specific sound, I often use a truck driving down the road, for instance. The main thing on my mind is not, what kind of truck is that? What year was it made? What model of truck is it? How fast is it going? The main thing on my mind is who is driving the truck,
Hmm.
and who is that character and what is on that character's mind, because I think that's really what we're trying to portray with the truck. And by the way, that's one of the main problems with AI generated sounds these days,
Uh-huh.
because all they seem to understand is the literal. They can, if you feed a piece of video into a certain AI sound program, it'll recognize what kind of truck it is, how fast it's going, etc. But it doesn't take into consideration this very important subtext of who's driving the truck and what the predominant emotion in that moment should be. So, given that I'm mainly concerned with the emotion of the moment, if it's a really bad guy driving the truck who's going somewhere to commit a murder, I'm going to start looking for sounds that convey that emotion. And so it could be a tiger growling or something that has some menace in it. And then after I find a set of possible sounds that are maybe engine-like in some way, but also have this kind of menacing emotional note in them, then at that point I'll go looking for more authentic sounds for the truck. And then the job is to integrate the two kinds of sounds so that what you hear sounds believably like a truck, but has this undertone of this is a scary guy, and because of that this is a scary truck, and it all makes emotional sense. So that's a long-winded way of saying that I think the emotion would be my number one priority also.
It's interesting to hear that. We really don't think about that as subtitlers, and I hope more people after watching this will actually get adopt the same approach. I think it's what they did in Top Gun. They mixed in the sounds of like tigers into the jets so that they
Yeah.
have more just something, the oomph, the energy. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you may have read that in the movie The Right Stuff, which I did early in my career. There are these sequences where the rocket engines are working so hard and going so fast that they're about to fail. And Philip Kaufman, the director, wanted to get across this idea that the engines might break apart at any moment. And I decided to put a sound in that you would never associate with a rocket engine, which is the squeal of chalk squeaking on a slate board.
Ignition.
And so I recorded a lot of these short squeals and then edited them together so it sounded like one long squeal. And, it's such an irritating sound anyway, that it really helped convey this idea that, wow, something really bad is about to happen with this engine. And so once again, it's, thinking more of emotion than of what's literally going on in the shot.
that'd be useful to hear from you, the word squealing. You can literally use it for some things. Or for Top Gun, you could write like
Yeah.
roaring, jet roars through sky, something like that. There's always creativity there. And
Mhm.
you spoke a little bit about AI. What is then your general attitude toward its use in sound design or creatively or technically?
Yeah. Well, I think my first hope is that we can delay as long as possible AI actually taking over the work and eliminating jobs. Because I want to see as many people as possible working on film and film sound for as long as possible. On the other hand, I think AI becoming more and more prominent and present in the process is inevitable. There's no way that we're going to stop it. Eventually, it's going to take my job and your job and the director's job and the CEO's job. It should probably take the CEO's job first because that's probably the easiest one to do. Because, after all, who would want to invest in a company that has a mere human running it when you could invest in a company that has this AI that knows a million times as much as the CEO does? So eventually we'll get there. It'll be a very different world than we live in now. But so for now, my attitude about AI is that we should use it as a tool. We should resist using it in ways that actually eliminates humans from the process. But it is inevitable, and I think it's also inevitable that the AI will get better and better and better at doing everything. Because I think that all of the skills that we employ can be learned, and anything that can be learned can be done by an AI if it's sophisticated enough.
That's a scary thought. And who's gonna watch that and listen to that? AI too?
Yeah,
We're going to go full circle.
yeah,
Yeah. It's not dissimilar in our profession. We're also, we
yeah,
think more or less the same.
yeah.
And my last question, for now at least, is a little bit personal, and I just hope this is not wrong. I also took it from IMDb that you worked on an animated film from Japan called Ghost in the Shell, second part.
I did work
And
on that. Yes.
ah, thanks God. And I couldn't see anything about it from you in any interview or blog article or anywhere. And so I thought I would ask you, because Ghost in the Shell Part 1 is one of my favorite films of all time. I adore it. So, how was it working in that movie? Was there anything special about the work, the sound design, or anything memorable from it?
Yeah, yeah. I loved working on it, and it was my first time working in anime, and so I had a lot to learn about that process. And you probably know, but probably most people don't know, that it's has been typical in anime for the dialogue for the film to be written after all the animation is done.
Right.
They obviously have some sense of what's eventually going to be said in each scene, but certainly a lot of the dialogue, sometimes all of the dialogue, is written towards the end of animation. And that's made possible partly by the fact that there has not been a real tradition in anime of lip sync.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny, the director of the film told me that he thinks it's just bizarre that you would do it any other way, because he said, how do I know what I want the characters to say until after we've decided, exactly what they're doing, in the frame. And I guess that makes a kind of sense. But I had a lot of freedom on that film to use stylized sounds, partly because the visuals are so stylized. Very often slow motion is used, which is always a playground for sound design. And odd camera angles, which also kind of opens the door to use sound in interesting ways. Ultra close-ups, which are also great for sound. And so it was a blast. I made a couple of trips to Tokyo to talk with the filmmakers, and it was a lot of fun.
I'm glad to hear that. I wish I could
Yeah.
be there as a subtitler, but no, that was
Oh
way
well.
behind back in the day. I was too young for that. And I think I'm fresh. I'm all out of questions, and
Okay.
great that you could join. I hope I didn't ruin it for you. Like we ruin it for ourselves, subtitlers, film translators. When we watch a subtitled film, we can't just watch it. We have, oh, this comma is wrong. That's wrong. This could be better. And now
Yeah.
you're gonna watch a captioned film and think, oh, it's not what I meant with my sound design. This is wrong. This is wrong emotion.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
otherwise, thanks for joining. If you have any final thoughts, let me know.
Yeah, I'd say if it were up to me, I would give the subtitlers more freedom to be descriptive about sounds, and to not just say uh, uh, off-screen whispering, but to use more descriptive language so you get a sense of what's really going on in the moment. I think that would be my main hope.
Yeah, me too. More
Yeah,
emotion, more thought, and more collaboration. And
yeah.
to all my viewers and listeners, please check out Randy's amazing blog. I had a blast reading it, and I think you will too. Randy, thank you for joining again, and have a great day.
My pleasure. Thank you.